Chartres in World War II and beyond, celebrating friendships. Originally, I thought that this would just be a little session about Chartres in World War II, what was done to save and preserve the cathedral, the stained glass, and so forth. But as Dominique and I traded emails about this, she suggested, and I thought it was a really good idea, that we talk about how friendships developed through Eugene Schulz, a man who will be featuring tonight, with her, Gene's sons, and all of us, and now part of American Friends of Chartres, and how those friendships have really helped us learn more and expand our own knowledge about the cathedral, which has been really wonderful. So at any rate, here's what we're up to tonight. I'm going to spend some time talking about vulnerable monuments, including Chartres, but a little bit about the history of how things have played out for some of the cathedrals and churches in France. And then I'll talk a little bit too about saving the cathedral, what happened during World War II, with input from Dominique and from Dave and Paul Schulz, who are with us tonight too. I want to share how I heard about the story of Colonel Wellborn Griffith. He is now kind of famous for his work in helping to save the cathedral during World War II. And then to talk about an emerging story about how this story about Colonel Wellborn Griffith and what it's meant for Chartres has emerged over time. And part of that is going to be a tribute to Eugene Schulz, who was Colonel Griffith's secretary during World War II. And I just want to say here for the record that, ideally this would have taken place last week on Veterans Day, but we had other things going on. And now, as I think about it a little bit more, it's probably a good thing to do this between Veterans Day and Thanksgiving, because we're certainly going to honor some veterans here, and we're also going to be thankful for what they did on many levels. And we'll talk about that. Paul and Dave will be talking about it from their perspective as sons of Gene, Dominique and I as friends of Gene. And in that way, this whole thing is going to be a little bit different tonight, in that we focus on somebody who's really helped preserve the cathedral and witness to its story, which is a good story. So at any rate, over on the left, you see Dave and Paul behind their parents, Eleanor and Jean. Merce and I had the pleasure of meeting Eleanor and Jean in 2013. I'll tell you a little bit more about the story of our meeting as we go along. And then there over on the right is Dominique Lallement, the president of the American Friends of Chartres and a friend of all of ours. She's been instrumental in really preserving some of the stained glass there, restoring it through the work of the American Friends of Chartres, which I wholeheartedly support. It's a wonderful cause.
And she's with us tonight.
And they're all with us tonight, and they're going to be speaking tonight. Thanks, Merce, for mentioning that. Dominique has joined us from Paris, where it's after 1 a.m. We shifted this 1 hour earlier to make it, a little easier for Dominique, so she's not doing this at 3 a.m. or whatever. But at any rate, Dominique, thank you for being here. Paul and Dave, thank you for being here too. We really appreciate your participation in all of this and support. So, all right, we're going to be celebrating friends through this as well. Well, you guys have seen this before, but those of you who haven't seen it before, I just want to make sure that you know where Chartres is. It's about 60 miles southwest of Paris. And I'm going to just take a moment here to orient us a little bit, because part of this is going to be about World War II. You'll also see that it's about 100 miles southeast, a little bit southeast of the Normandy D-Day beaches, which are really up here between Caen and Utah Beach over here toward the peninsula. the D-Day beaches stretched from the west with Utah and the Americans, Utah and Omaha, to Gold Beach, Juneau, and Sword, closer to Cannes. Those 5 beaches were the sites where the Americans, Canadians, and the British came aboard, invaded France and the Atlantic Wall that the Germans had set up there. So at any rate, that's a little bit of at least orientation, and we're going to look at another map about how things worked out for Gene and the folks in his army. At any rate, here's a view of the cathedral. It, like all other cathedrals and churches in times of war, are vulnerable. Here's a little bit about the context for vulnerability as it exists in France. And I'll say at the onset here that when Merce and I first went to England, a little bit different than France, but similar issues, we noticed that most of the original stained glass was gone. The stained glass that we saw in the United States, made oftentimes in the 1800s and early 1900s, was very similar to the stained glass we saw in English cathedrals and churches. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that these buildings were attacked during the English Civil War, when there were these conflicts between the Protestants and Catholics, and a lot of stuff was destroyed at the time as papist imagery by the Protestants. So at any rate, some of that happened in France too. And a little bit east of Chartres is a city, Auxerre, where there's a cathedral dedicated to Saint Stephen. Beautiful cathedral built a little bit after Chartres Cathedral was built. And at the time it was built, it had really magnificent stained glass too. A lot of it was destroyed in the wars of religion after the Protestant Reformation. In this case, Huguenots came from Switzerland around Geneva. They were Calvinists and attacked some of the churches in Burgundy, in that part of France, fairly close to Switzerland. In these 2 images on the left, you'll see some statues missing from the niches here, but up above, there's this image in the tympanum of Christ, and more than likely, one of these saints beheaded now is Saint Stephen. And that's often what happened. They were beheaded or defaced. And I'm going to focus in a little bit on the door lintels here on either side. Those lintels tell the story, or show the story, of 5 maidens, some with oil in their lamps and others without. Parable of the 10 maidens from the book of Matthew, which was a parable that Christ told to explain the kingdom of heaven and how one had to be watchful. And interestingly, I mean, this story certainly would have been relevant for Catholics and Protestants alike, but here is one of the maidens beheaded. And that was sort of the routine. A lot of things were just defaced. In some cases, these things have been restored, but it takes a lot of money and hard work and time to get this stuff restored. Some of the glass in this cathedral was restored, but long and short of it is that wars are hard on sacred structures. During the French Revolution, the largest church up until St. Peter's was built in Rome was an abbey at Cluny in Burgundy, in the southern part of Burgundy. This is an area surrounded by vineyards, and you find a lot of great wine being made in this region. But one of the really moving historical sites is the town of Cluny and the ruins there. During the French Revolution, the church was associated in the revolutionaries' minds with the state, with the king. And there was a lot of backlash against both the king and church in the years between 1793 and 1800, as you probably well know. What's left of this huge church are things like this down here on the bottom right. It's really it's the base of one of the pillars that was inside. Over here are some of the broken pillars. The church was attacked, and defaced in many ways, and then toward the end of the French Revolution, or around, I think, 1798 or so, it was sold for scrap, basically, and quarried for its stone, mainly limestone and stuff. And about 10% of what was there can still be seen among the ruins. But the act that really set the French and others on notice when World War II started was something that happened in World War I at Reims Cathedral, which was the cathedral that the French monarchy used as its coronation site. So it had a lot of associations with France as a symbol. Well, here are two postcards that I found. You all know that I love postcards. Up on the left, Reims Cathedral, about 100 miles east of Paris, before or at the onset of World War I. And then during World War I, it was shelled. And many of the sculptures, as you can see here, were just destroyed and turned to rubble. And it was this experience of the attacks on the cathedral at Reims that when World War II came really put people on notice that they needed to do something about the art, stained glass and sculpture to protect them at the monuments in Notre Dame in Paris, Chartres, and other cathedrals around France. So here's a little bit now then about Chartres in World War II for perspective. The Germans occupied it from June 1940 to August 1944. The windows were taken out, removed and hidden, some in one of the sub-basements of the cathedral and others in southwestern France. There's a good book about it written by a gentleman named Victor Pollock. It'll be on that reading list that I've been promising you since the first time around. That'll come out with the recordings, the links to the recordings to all of these sessions. Then, just before D-Day, American bombers bombed Chartres erroneously. It was a big mistake. They were aiming at other military targets, but bombs fell on Chartres' library and destroyed the library with a lot of medieval manuscripts. So that was kind of the start of the invasion for France, for Chartres. D-Day came on June 6, 1944. And then on August 16th to 18th, General Patton's Third Army, breaking out from Normandy with Eugene Schulz as one of its members, liberated Chartres. A couple things to say about that. They came to Normandy after D-Day. General Patton's army stayed in England until late July. In fact, they came aboard on they came into France on July 22nd, which was Eugene's 21st birthday. But what was going on, why they were there later than D-Day, has much to do with the fact that Patton was thought to be the guy who would be leading the real invasion that would be coming at the narrowest point between England and France at Calais. So there was this huge deception about Patton, and he was making occasional appearances in southern England to try to keep that whole deception alive. And then later in July, he and the Third Army came into France, landing at Utah Beach, coming aboard with their supplies and so forth, and getting ready to move. They broke out from Normandy, started the breakout around August 1st, and were in Chartres by August 15th. I want to say a few things now about what was going on behind the scenes, and this will illuminate our discussion about Colonel Wellborn and Gene and what happened in Chartres on August 16th. You see there General Eisenhower speaking with paratroopers from the 101st Airborne. Eisenhower, I think as most of you know, was the Supreme Allied Commander trying to keep the coalition together, the British, the Canadians, others, working real hard to keep Churchill, General Montgomery, and others happy, balancing between the Allies. One of the things that he did on the same day that those American planes mistakenly dropped their bombs on Chartres was to issue an order. And I'm going to read this because it really is important for understanding what happens a little bit later. He said, he wrote in the orders to all of the armies, shortly we will be fighting our way across the continent of Europe in battles designed to preserve our civilization. Inevitably, in the path of our advance will be found historical monuments, such as Chartres Cathedral, which symbolize to the world all that we are fighting to preserve. It is the responsibility of every commander to protect and respect these symbols whenever possible. So Ike was putting folks on notice, especially after some monuments had been lost in the invasion of Italy, that they were to do their best, their utmost, to protect these monuments from American shelling and harm. But at the same time, in the same order, he said, in some circumstances, the success of the military operation may be prejudiced in our reluctance to destroy these revered objects. But the lives of our men are paramount. So where military necessity dictates, commanders may order the required action, even though it involves destruction to some honored site. So he was setting up judgment calls for officers, for the commanding officers in the American military to make, weighing pros and cons and such. Well, leading the Third Army in Jean and Colonel Wellborn was General George S. Patton, one of the most capable commanders in the American armies in World War II, and now kind of a legend thanks to the movie in the 1970s about Patton, starring George C. Scott. Here he is talking with one of his officers. He gave a famous speech that has some interesting things in it right before his troops left for France. That speech, a very tamed down version of the speech, was presented at the beginning of the movie. Here's an excerpt. Sure, we all want to go home. We want to get this war over with, but you can't win a war lying down. The quickest way to get it over with is to get the bastards who started it. When a man is lying in a shell hole, if he just stays there all day, a Boche, German, will get him eventually. The hell with that. My men don't dig foxholes. Foxholes only slow up an offensive. Keep moving. This was part of a much longer speech that had, by my count, about 8 F-bombs, probably 5 or 6 shits, and various other words that ended with sucker. It was a real profane, but very moving and warm speech to the troops, to the enlisted men. Some of the officers were a little bit uncomfortable with some of his colorful language, but the men loved it. And some people have said it was one of the best motivational speeches of all time. Well, I suspect that Jean and Colonel Wellborn got the message about keep moving. And that may have showed up on August 16th in Chartres too. So at any rate, this is some of the context, the backdrop for what came next. So the Third Army from Utah Beach went very quickly across France. They did a few things. Their different divisions did different things. One of them went west and confronted Germans on the west coast of France. Another one, and this was very important for the liberation of Paris, came up to the a little bit east of the Normandy beaches and worked with the Canadian units that had come down from Caen here to Falaise, where a German army with about 50,000 troops was based. They were fighting hard against the Canadians and the Brits and keeping them from moving out from Normandy. Patton's army came up from behind them and created what was called the Falaise Pocket. They encircled 50,000 German troops, basically immobilizing them and preventing them from coming down and defending Paris, which is down here, over here, I'm sorry to say. Getting my geography messed up. Eugene's army came this way. Chartres is right about here. His army, his part of the army was called the 20th Corps. Here they are arriving in Chartres. People were pretty happy to see them. Here's what happened shortly thereafter. In front of Place Châtelet, they liberated a neighborhood called Beaulieu. Right before the Germans left, there was this medieval gate on Paris, on Chartres' south side, across the river. Germans destroyed it as they were leaving, probably giving some evidence that they were blowing things up on their way out of town. You can see here, top of the arch that came down. All that's left now is this. Other things happened. There were a lot of skirmishes between German and French and American troops, and also with the French resistance. The French resistance was working very closely with the Americans during the liberation of Chartres. Here's a bullet hole in one of the cathedral doors. This is courtesy of Paul Schulz, who's a wonderful photographer and took some great shots along the way here. And then there was the American hero who saved Chartres Cathedral. This is a headline from a newspaper from, I think, around 2014, 15, just a few years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. I first learned about Colonel Griffith when I was preparing to give a talk about Chartres Cathedral to the Iowa Senior Center. I went back, looked at a Wikipedia article about Chartres Cathedral to see if there was anything new, anything I missed. And oh my God, there was something new. There was something about this colonel in Patton's army in the 20th Corps who went into the cathedral with one of his enlisted men to inspect it and make sure that German snipers weren't in one of its towers. Some of his men were firing at the cathedral, and there was an order, as you could see with from Eisenhower's orders, that if they found resistance and if men's lives were threatened, that they were to attack it. And the Third Army was an armored division. It was made up of tanks, cannon, and various various artillery things. So it would have been quite possible that if there had been real German resistance there, that Chartres Cathedral could have been shelled by an American tank trying to get one of those sniper nests or whatever it might be out of there. Well, Colonel Griffith decided to inspect the place while all of this was going on. There were skirmishes going all around the city. This was the first day that the Americans arrived, and it was his job as an operations officer to really get a sense of what was happening and to help direct the attack. Well, oh shoot, it's not moving forward now, Merce.
Well, you can.
Did I do something wrong?
No, you didn't do anything wrong. I've just been sitting there for a while. It's behind. Let's go back and then we can
Try again.
going.
Okay. Okay, there we go. So if the Americans had shelled the cathedral, what would have been lost? Well, this is where the Germans would have been. Up a big or a long, narrow staircase, I'll show you a photo of it in a bit, and up here where they would have a very good vantage point of the plaza, or not, it wasn't a plaza then, but of the area, the neighborhood below, and also of the surrounding areas. What might have been lost if it had been shelled is this gallery called the Gallery of Kings, details in the tower and the framework, the architecture of the cathedral. Colonel Griffith climbed this tower by this staircase. If the Germans had been there, they would have probably heard him coming and he would have been a dead man when he got to the top. But from the top, he had a view of Chartres rail yard, train station, which came a little bit later, but of the route to Paris. And that's why Chartres was such a strategic place. It was on the road, the train and highways to Paris. Here's the Gallery of Kings that probably would have been destroyed. I learned later that Germans actually did shell the cathedral on August 18th, 3 days later. So here's something that was written about Colonel Griffith. For centuries, the Chartres Cathedral was one of France's treasures, and it would have been destroyed if not for Colonel Griffith's heroic action. After searching the cathedral and finding no German troops, he rang the cathedral bells as a sign for the Americans not to shoot. Later the same day, defending the town of Lève, just about 4 or 5 miles from Chartres, it's an easy walk. I did it along the river when I was there in 2019. It's like a suburb. He was killed defending the town of Lève. And we'll talk a little bit about that and the celebration of his sacrifice a little bit later on in this. Every year on August 16th, flowers are placed in front of the building where he died. This is the place where he died, along a little highway out of Lève. There's a plaque here. It says here, loosely translated, here was killed on 16th of August, 1944, American Colonel Wellborn B. Griffith. He was from Quanah, Texas, was a West Point grad. The photo of him earlier was of his graduation photo at West Point in 1924-25. A few days after the Americans left on August 18th, General Charles de Gaulle, later the president of France, visited Chartres and the cathedral. Here you see the front of the cathedral. I wanted to include this photo from the archives at the Chartres library, in part to show you what was being done to protect the sculpture that we've looked at. There were sandbags all over the place, and it looks here like there were railroad ties bracketed around some of the sculptures too. So at any rate, all of those efforts went into preserving the cathedral and making it possible for us to see it as it is today. Dave and Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you to say a little bit about your dad, and you're part of the story in all of this. What share, please share. And folks, Dave and Paul are 2 of Gene's 5 sons. So at any rate, Paul, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. This was a neat opportunity for us. 3 of our children and my wife Ella were there, and we flew with my dad and mom and my brother Tom and his wife and our 2 daughters to Chicago, and then went from Chicago to Paris. And then one of the things we did ahead of time is we traced Dad's steps from the D-Day or the landing at Utah Beach, and we knew about how he came across on his 21st birthday and things, and we knew that he had been to France on this trip, goodness sake, about 2 or 3 times, and 1994, the 50th anniversary and stuff, and so we stopped at the Brittany American Cemetery at this picture here, and the lady who was managing or caretaker at the cemetery brought like a dish of sand and some water, because as you see that behind my dad there, the markers are, you can't see the names, and so they're kind of etched inside the stone there, and so they use the sand to brush it in there and highlight it, and so it was really cool. And I said, Dad, why don't you salute this thing? And we learned a lot. Goodness sake, where do you start? David knows a lot more of the prior history of my dad and the war and stuff, but for the longest time, I'll go backtrack a bit here. For the longest time, my dad never talked about it. And like every other soldier who came back from Germany and France in 1945, they just did not talk about it. They went to work, they went to school, and raised a family. And but it wasn't until about the year 2000 when my dad actually could talk about his time in World War II, and he was very emotional about it, of course. And Dad was a regular speaker for Northwestern Mutual Life. He was in this, that circuit there for North NML, and so he was he's well liked and respected public speaker, and he just had that command. And so this was. And interesting enough, at first we weren't sure we were going to go to the 75th anniversary. And at the time we bought our plane tickets, we did not know that Dad had been nominated for the Legion of Honor medal, which will be talked about later on. But we went, and I tell you, this was probably the greatest trip I've ever been on in my life. And to go to Utah Beach with my dad and mom, and remembering 75 years earlier, it makes me want to cry just thinking about it. But it's just really a neat experience to be there with my dad and my mom and my wife and 3 of our children. But it just was a treat to do that. And prior to this, we kind of learned about the history of Colonel Griffith a little bit, and we read his book, my dad's book, and I just think it's an amazing history of World War II and things like this. And to go with my dad and mom, and then to go to the Legion of Honor service ceremony later on that weekend, that was it just gives me goosebumps to think about it, and to see my dad, tears, whether it's on the beach at Utah Beach, and we're at the gravesite of Colonel Griffith. It just was really an amazing thing. And Mike, what you're talking about, his friends and stuff, that's kind of talking about, I think, a little bit of Dad's second book that hopefully will come out in the near future. Contacts that he's made through American Friends of Chartres and speaking for the honor flight tours and things like that. And I don't know if you want to, I see on your agenda, Gene and the Holocaust deniers. Is this a place perhaps to share something like that, or?
Sure.
Okay. My dad was, he talked about this a lot to very many different groups. And, we're members of the Wisconsin Lutheran Synod, and our teacher training school is in New Ulm, Minnesota. My dad and mom went up there several years ago to give a talk. And we actually got to watch it on a video call or something like this, which is really an amazing thing. And we've seen several of his dad's slide shows on this stuff. But anyway, one of the things that he talked about, in his book as well, was that, shortly after the Allies discovered the camp at Ohrdruf, which is, satellite camp of Buchenwald, and it's near Erfurt, Germany. And right now that camp is gone, of course. I think there might be a plaque, I don't know. But shortly after they discovered this camp, Eisenhower said, okay, as many soldiers as possible, as many people as possible, go and see this camp. Why? Corroboration. To corroborate what the Nazis had done. And when my dad went in there, he talks about it quite graphically in his book. The smell was horrible. And interesting enough, the smell of burnt flesh is what led my dad to never want to be cremated. So anyway, he saw the camp with one of his buddies and talked about that. He had pictures of it. There's some in his book. He used these pictures in his talks. Anyway, after he's done with this presentation at this teaching college in New Ulm, Minnesota, Martin Luther College, there is a guy named, I don't know if Mike, if you knew of this guy, his name was Herman Naughton.
I didn't know him.
He was with the Missouri Synod, and he had a newspaper thing called Christian News. And I never subscribed, but he sent it to all churches, all pastors, all the time, both in Missouri Synod, Wisconsin Synod. And a lot of us just ragging on stuff. But anyway, he wrote an article in time shortly after my dad's talk in New Ulm. And he just ripped my dad to shreds. This guy, Herman Naughton was his name. He's dead now, but he's a Holocaust denier. And just ripped my dad something fierce in this little article in Christian News, saying he's not, I don't remember exactly what he said, but basically it just was, it never happened.
God.
And yet
hurtful all the way
my
around.
dad was there. He smelled it, he saw it, and it was burned into his mind for decades. And for a long time, even when he started talking about his time in World War II, you know, at first talking about Ohrdruf and things like that, it just made my dad very emotional, and rightly so. But in this last, I mean, I don't know, and David can attest to this as well, but the last few years, he could go through it without becoming that emotional. But anyway, it's just, you know, a treat to read my dad's book. Looking forward to his second book but also to go with my dad and mom and with my wife, Ella, to go to these places and see what happened on see Chartres Cathedral, Lev, you know, Utah Beach, Omaha Beach. There's this really, really amazing history. And my dad, I mean, 99 years and 4 days before he went to heaven and stuff, but he was there, and to come home alive and well and talk about this and share it. And you know, it's just miss him dearly.
Yeah.
But anyway, anything else, Della? So I think that's all for now, but I'd be happy to answer questions later on too.
Okay. And we'll have,
Back to that slide presentation.
yeah, Paul, we're going to go back to the slide presentation and we'll show some more of the slides that you shared with me of your dad. And we've got a lot coming up about the 75th anniversary of the liberation in just a bit. And Dominique's going to be talking about how she met Paul and Dave's dad and how it all contributed to telling so many stories that came out of this.
I don't know where I fit. If you want, I can give you a couple-minute background that goes back farther before he wrote the book.
Sure. Thanks, Dave.
So my dad was a kid when he got drafted. He got drafted right out of college, you know, not educated, hadn't been anywhere except Clintonville, Wisconsin. And so he ended up getting drafted, ending up in France. And he had two things. He had a good camera, and he kept a diary, which I believe was illegal, but he kept a diary. And he just watched. After the war, he didn't talk about it. I remember when I was a kid, I was in high school, I found his pictures from Ohrdruf. We had a darkroom in the basement, and I found his pictures there of, you know, these bodies, and he just took them away and wouldn't talk about it. And so it wasn't, like Paul said, till many years later that he started thinking of writing his memoirs. So his memoirs, that's his first book. And he told me, in fact, in his inscription, I have an autographed copy, of course. He said, "This is my legacy, Dave. I want you to read it." And so the cathedral was only a small part of that story. I mean, a lot of it was him growing up, and a lot of it was the Holocaust. And I think the Holocaust, like Paul said, really, really upset him. And Holocaust deniers made him more angry than anything in the world. But he kept saying he was going to write his memoirs, and he never did and never did. And finally, we kind of pestered him to death, and he started writing them. And they came out really good. I mean, he's my dad. I'm prejudiced, but they came out really. It was a good book. But I think that, the whole part about the cathedral, when my dad saw the cathedral back in 1944, there were no windows. It was just a cathedral. He had no real appreciation of that sort of thing. I mean, he's just a high school farm boy. But afterwards, he didn't see the windows till 1971 when he visited me when I was studying in France. So I don't really think when he wrote the book that the story about Chartres was really the biggest part of it. But, life being what it is, somebody, and I'm not quite sure who, read that part of his book and connected it with Colonel Griffith's daughter. And I'm not even sure how Dominique ever got involved in this, but that sort of spiraled into something completely unexpected. And then he got invited back to Chartres. He and my mom were there, invited by the mayor, I think. I don't even remember what year. And then they were there 3 or 4 times, culminating in the 2019 ceremony. But anyway, that's sort of how my dad got there. So it was kind of serendipitous, I think. He told this story because he kept notes and he was interested in it, and he loved his colonel. I mean, it was clear from everything he ever said. But just pure serendipity that led to this, and I think it's so awesome. So that's all I'll say.
Dave, what was his connection with Colonel Griffith?
He was his secretary. My dad, when he got drafted, knew how to type. He had taken typing in high school, and that was his real only qualification in the military. And they assigned him to, Colonel Griffith as part of the typing pool, and then the whole time he was just his secretary. He typed orders and stuff like that. That's all.
He also knew German too. So
yeah, except he didn't use German hardly ever in Europe.
Right. Yeah.
At the end of the war, a couple Germans surrendered to him, and he was able to talk to them. But he did know German. Yeah, German was his first language.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And to both of you, when did your dad write the book finally? 10 years ago or so? How?
Okay, let me reconstruct this. He started writing when my son Ben, whom some of you know, Ben came with me in 2019, pestered him to death. Ben was an English major in college. And Ben said, "Grandpa, I will edit the book for you. I'll help you write it, but you have to sit down and write it." So it was after Ben graduated from college, which would have been around maybe 2006 or 7, maybe, is when he started writing it.
Okay.
yeah, I think so.
And they probably worked on it a year. My dad's a good writer. He would write letters. I studied abroad and things like that. I've gotten hundreds of letters from my dad, and he's a great writer. But Ben really was merciless. I mean, it was all red ink, his first draft, and my dad was kind of discouraged at first.
Well, I'm glad he persisted.
Yeah, we all are.
I've read the book. It really is a wonderful memoir. One of the things that I remember I didn't know, he writes about crossing the Atlantic on the Queen Mary
Yes.
without an escort, that is, without any destroyers or anything else
Yeah, isn't
around
that
it to
something?
protect it. And he said, well, it was because the Queen Mary could go faster than they could outrun the German submarines. And I was just thinking to myself, holy camole, that would have been a very, very, very anxious crossing for me if I got on that ship.
There were six.
Here's a funny story that has nothing to do with Chartres, but they, my mom and dad went around the world on the QE2, and they went through the Suez Canal and had to go through Pirate Alley, by Somalia.
Yeah.
And so they did the same thing. They put sharpshooters on the top deck. They floored it. That boat can go faster than any pirate ship. And they had a helicopter flying above them the whole time they went through Pirate Alley. So my dad's done that a couple of times in his life.
Deja vu. Oh my goodness. All right.
And there were 16,000 soldiers on that ship too, and it's painted gray, and they went aboard at night because they were not allowed on deck until they were out in the Atlantic.
Oh my goodness.
That's so cool.
Well, we're gonna shift
Yeah.
to Dominique and have her tell a little bit about how she connected with Gene. And I'll wrap this up and tell you a little bit more about how Merce, Core, and I got to meet him, and Eleanor too. So at any rate, I gotta,
Dominique now, or?
yeah, I'm gonna go through the slides that Paul shared with us, just to give you a little sense of what we've been talking about. Merce is going back to the PowerPoint. There we go. Oh, and we got the same problem again, honey.
Well, just go backwards and then go forwards. Yeah, it's sat there quite a while, so,
There we go. Well, there's a cover of Gene's book, The Ghost in General Patton's Third Army, available on Amazon and other fine book selling establishments. Paul sent some photos of the celebration of the Legion of Honor medal presentation ceremony in that weekend in September. I'm going to move past these pretty quickly. So we can get to, there's Eleanor, Gene, and all of their 5 sons. We can get to Dominique's slides and her reflections on friendship with Gene. Dominique, thank you for being here in the middle of the night in Paris.
No, it's a great pleasure, and I would stay all night for this if it was needed. And as a matter of transition, let me first say that just before I left now to come to France, I lent Eugene's memoirs, to a friend of mine who is also a veteran and is 103 years old.
oh, no.
And I visited him the day before I left, and we had a chat, and he was very interested, so I lent him the book. So when I come back, I really look forward to Tom reacting to the book and sharing with me more of his experience during World War II. As I was, trying to put some thoughts together for this little chat, as Mike said before, the more I thought about it, the more I thought we should talk about, how Chartres is a unique story of courage, resilience, and friendships. And in terms of friendships, I will start with the 2 cousins, les deux amis in French, although I would have said in the more informal way, the 2 copines. There is this wonderful sculpture of Mary and Elizabeth chatting on the north portal. And the way they are facing each other and looking so engaged and intimate really intrigued me in the overall sculptural portraiture in Chartres, which is rather stiff. but they are not. They are very engaged, and I like that. And I think for me, their friendship is still alive today through all of us. But we talked about courage and resilience, and we should mention, of course, the people of Chartres who saved the glass. I put both in World War I, although I'm not so much up to date on World War I as in World War II. But let me mention that, you know, the best account that I have read of the bombing of Reims Cathedral is in Victor Pollock's book, the first chapter. And that to me was very moving because my father was from Reims and my grandfather was with the Red Cross. And when the Germans bombed Reims Cathedral, the cathedral was used by the German occupying forces as a hospital. So the Germans ended up building, I think they managed to evacuate most of the people. And I had a picture of my grandfather, or I've seen it, I don't have a copy, but I've seen a picture of him in the rubbles of Reims Cathedral looking for survivors. So this whole story really stirred me a lot, if I may say so. And we talk about the courage of those who served in the liberation of Chartres. And we would not have, you know, the cathedral today, the cathedral that brings us all, if it hadn't been for the courage of such people as Colonel Griffith and Eugene Schulz. So to me, that's why I thought that we should talk about friendship beyond World War II. Let's go on. As part of the story of friendship, I had to mention Servane de l'Hermateus. She was the president of our sister, or when I say our, it's American Friends of Chartres, of the French sister organization called Chartres Sanctuaire du Monde for 20 years. And she was a true model of resilience, humanism, and friendship. Servane and her husband, Jean, visited New York and had lunch with Monica Riley in a restaurant that unfortunately no longer exists in New York called L'Absinthe. Monica had been working for the World Monuments Fund, and she had been recommended to Jean and Servane as someone, an American who potentially would be willing to establish an organization called for Chartres in the United States. And Monica walked into the lounge saying, "No, I'm not going to do this." And by the end of the lunch, she had said, "Yes, I'm going to do it." So thanks to Servane and Jean, a power of conviction and Monica generosity, American Friends of Chartres came to be. And the story continues. Servane was a visionary and a universalist. Although a fervent Catholic, she welcomed absolutely everyone, I would say, under her roof. And it's not just a figurative expression. She welcomed everyone in our apartments, and it was always a wonderful experience. She also struggled with cancer for about 10 years or more. And her last public appearance was for the Legion of Honor award ceremony in Chartres. And at the dinner that followed, she gave a beautiful speech in English in the honor of Eugene and his family. Servan became a personal friend, and I put a picture on the top left of one of the signing ceremony for one of the agreements that we have with the French, that we had with the French government for the restoration of the sculptures. And the two associations function with what we called a friendship agreement. So friendship is really what continues to get us together. Next one. Next slide. Yeah. Here is Monica to the left. After she suggested to the board that I become the next president. So she was president from 2005 until March 12 of 2013, when I followed in all humility in her footsteps. I put a few pictures of the board members here, and a very diversified board with Anne Sullivan, who left last year, but Craig, who is still with us, Kai, who also left the board, but still is a close friend, Jill Jeffrian, who is here with Eleanor, and that picture is from the trip in April of 2018. And then guess what? I think at the bottom we have Mike, who is in our advisory board. Next one. I mentioned donors because donors are friends or become friends. And here we have on the left a picture of the very first donor trip that I organized. And to do so, it almost required that I get the courage or the inspiration to do so. And the lady on the left, Enid, is someone I met in Boston. And when we were showing the film on Chartres, and she absolutely wanted to go back, and then that gave me the inspiration to say, okay, I'll organize something and we'll see how it works. So I've been taking a few groups of people, some I know, some I don't. And Helen Hilken last year took a group of American and French women who are part of the organization that she belongs to when she is in France. Next. But with all of this, as you can see by the numbers, you cannot beat the Schulz family. And I think we were 35 or 37 at this, on this picture. Most everybody was from the Schulz family. There may have been 5 or maybe 7 or 8 friends, I would say. But it was so extraordinary for me to have the opportunity to meet you know, all of the children and so many of the grandchildren. And I think this weekend that we all spent in September of 2019 between Chartres and Lèves is a weekend that we will all cherish forever and remember. And I think we could have a session just chatting about this, all the events and whatever happened. But I included a picture taken at the Mass where the priest was giving a special benediction to the Schulz family, and the altar boy could not help but turning around to figure out who the Schulzes were. Next. So this is, how did I get to know Eugene? Somehow, when I became the president of the organization, there was nothing really written about Colonel Wellborn Griffith. And that intrigued me, the why nothing in the archives of the organization was written about him, or, so I started researching about him and found, articles. At the time, there was nothing in Wikipedia, by the way, but then I started finding a number of articles. Then I asked Craig to give me a hand, because Craig is very good at doing research. So Craig found Alice Irving, Colonel Griffith's daughter, and she gave him Eugene's email and phone number. And then I talked to Alice for a long time, and we started collecting information this way. And then in the summer of 2014, I went to Houston, Texas to bring my daughter back to DC from Texas. And we were going to leave on August 16th. So I thought, well, while I'm in Texas, maybe I could go to Quanta. I took a map or whatever. I found out that it's about an 8-hour drive, the European things that you can just hop on a train and you'll be there in a couple of hours. No. So I could not go to Quanta, but I did speak to the library, and she did not know the story of Colonel Griffith. Colonel Griffith. So on the day that we left, I asked my daughter to make a wreath. We bought some flowers and everything she needed. And then we went to the cemetery on our way out of Houston and deposited the wreath under in the special place for veterans in the cemetery. Then finally, Eugene and Eleanor were coming through DC. I think I got the dates right, of October 30 and 31st. They had taken the trip to England first and then went to Lèves and Chartres. And on the way back, there was a Veterans Day celebration in DC, and they met the Wisconsin chapter. I'm using the word chapter because I'm not very familiar with the military language. So we agreed that I would pick them up at the airport. So I bumped into a friend of mine who took those pictures, and then we met. And I think that the first big excitement was for me to see them arriving and being given a big hug by Eugene, and then posing with the two of them. Then we had, a reception at my house. Probably the worst dinner that I ever cooked. I was so nervous, so impressed, so everything, that I think I forgot that the fish was in the oven. It was dry like rock. But Eleanor was, of course, very gracious. She says, I'll eat anything that I don't have to cook. Next. So that's how we met. And after that, it's just a story of sharing events. So when in April of 2018, they were taking down the windows that we were restoring, the baker's window in the nave of the cathedral, I organized a small donor strip for that and invited Eugene and Eleanor to join. But as part of being in Chartres, I also organized a visit in Lèves, and we led some wreaths where the colonel was killed. So the central picture is in front of the plaque that Mike showed before. On this picture, there is a lady with a hat, the only lady with a hat. Her name was Yolande de Schoenen, and she was a very young resistant. Her family was in the resistance. And when she was, their property was occupied by the Germans, so they had to go to another family member's house, and she would have to go with their horse cart full of hay to deliver milk to the Germans. And one day, while she was doing that, she was also hiding in the hay a British soldier who then was being evacuated to another home. So stories like that, came again through our friendships of Chartres, or the friendships that we built in Chartres. I don't know if we have time to see the special birthday present for Eugene.
Call me here.
If you click, yeah.
We'll see.
Right, yeah. Well, we are so.
Well, Eugene,
Yes.
we have a special birthday present for you
Oh my goodness. That is
to show his gratitude for giving your youth to France and the French people at the end of World War II. The President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron, has awarded you Legion of Honor.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Oh my gosh! I can't believe it! Oh wow! Oh my goodness! This is so humbling. Here it is. The Knight of the Legion of Honor. Oh my goodness. Oh, I don't know. And here it is. Oh my god. Oh my goodness. Look at all these things behind the present. Oh, this is unbelievable. Will we have any chance of meeting him?
Probably not.
We're still working on it, but don't have too many hopes.
We understand. He's
The
a
Legion of Honor was created by Napoleon in 1802, and this is the highest distinction that France can bestow upon those who have achieved remarkable deeds for the country.
Wow.
There will be a ceremony in Chartres on September 13th, during which the prefect of Eure-et-Loir, Madame Sophie Brocas, will pin the medal. I'm very honored, Eugene, to give you this message. Congratulations.
Oh my congratulations. Oh.
Okay, let's continue, Mike. Yes.
I don't know what to say.
But I do have a French flag somewhere in the back.
Dominique, go ahead.
Okay, I thought you would all enjoy seeing that. I believe that not many
Yeah,
Yes.
that was wonderful.
have seen it. Now,
Merci.
I think there was a question earlier on how this came about. I'll try to be very brief. I was meeting with at the French embassy with the consul general, and talking about American Friends of Chartres and how, I believe that our work was a way of continuing building up the friendship between the US and France. And I told him about Colonel Griffith and about Jean. And he said, well, has Jean been decorated of the Legion of Honor? And I said, I don't believe he has. So following that meeting, which took place on the 26th of July of 2018, then I contacted Mark, and we worked for months with Mark so that he could assemble all the papers that were necessary for the French to do their due diligence, and then for the medal to be awarded. so you've seen then, you know, pictures of the Chartres ceremony. Then I had the opportunity of going to Milwaukee with Claire Babette, who was one of the restorers of the windows in Chartres. And Mike and Merce were part of this extraordinary trip. We met in Minneapolis, then drove to Milwaukee together. And here in Milwaukee, the picture to the right, Gene insisted that he introduced me to some local foods. I don't remember the names, but it was yummy. And I love the picture of Mercy and Eleanor, so engaged. Next.
Covers.
What is it?
Covers.
Yes, Dovers, that's it. Next slide, Mike.
Right, yeah. Well,
Next slide, not the, yeah. So, you know, as part of this friendship, I thought I would just talk very briefly about some of the lessons from the things that I learned from Gene. To the left, you have the window of the reconciliation. This window is a post-war window and was given by the German government, and with representations of the Jewish rights and traditions. And of all places, the German government chose Chartres at the place where they wanted to ask for forgiveness. It's a gorgeous window, it's beautiful. Children, Gene loved to talk to children, at least in my experience, and the 2 times that we were in Lev together, he made side trips to talk to the kids in the school. And at the first talk, I remember that one kid asked, how was it to live in the trenches? And Gene said, well, I wish we did not have to live in the trenches, because war is what calls those trenches. And the kid was probably a little bit disappointed, but it was such a strong message. Gene also struck me as someone who never hesitated to give a chance to learn in many ways. Below the picture of the children, there is a picture of a French woman to the left and her father to the right. After the 2019 ceremony in Lev, she came to me and she said, my mother, who lived through the liberation, always talked to me in my youth of American soldiers, and I've never met one. Do you think that I could meet Mr. Schulz? And I said, sure. And I explained to Gene, and he said, of course, I'll be happy to have my picture taken with you. Another gift of his generosity. In the middle is a Frenchman whose name escapes me right now, but he made some very beautiful speeches about reconciliation and peace, and how after the war, people had to relearn how to live together, how to forgive, how to be good neighbors again, because you did not know who had been in the resistance, who had been a collaborator. And his way of talking was so compelling, a very strong message of peace and respect and building up understanding between people. The next picture at the bottom is of a group of people, young people, who are doing some voluntary work in Chartres, and they wanted to know what all the fuss was about in the cathedral. So again, Jean said, sure, we'll have our picture taken together. In the center, I took that picture not because I'm in it, but because I'm wearing my father's military cap. My father was in the resistance, and I never, sorry, I'm becoming a bit emotional now. I never had the courage to even question him about what he did in the resistance. But my participating on behalf of American Friends of Chartres, and even at one of for the 70th anniversary, I was actually representing the United States, was something that made me think very, very deeply about war, about peace, about sacrifice, and about resistance. And very recently, I was having lunch with an Afghan woman who was the first female governor of a province. And that was over the Banyan province, where the Buddhas were destroyed by the Talibans. And when Mike was saying earlier how religious monuments get damaged and destroyed, you know, during wars or forms of wars, that's another example of what's taking place today. And as we were discussing this, we also discuss the value of resistance, you know, for your, if you believe in peace, if you believe in humanity, you need to fight for those values. And all this experience with Eugene and American Friends of Chartres has been really helping me, making a lot of progress, I should say. The picture to the right, I didn't know that it would be shown before, but that's another message from Jean. If you want to have kids, make sure you have lots of them, make sure they are all bright and handsome, and wear a tie for good occasions. And lastly, never cease to tell the story. So the last picture is that of Paul Creamer, who wrote a very good article about the story of Colonel Griffith, and Anne-Marie Woods, who is our beloved guide of Chartres, very inspiring young woman. Next. So Eugene, thank you. And Mike, thank you. You have been such an inspiration to put all this material together and present it and share it with us. It's absolutely wonderful. So what can I say? There is no better word than thank you and merci. I love you. Love you all.
Thank you, Dominique. I'm assigned the task of wrapping this up. I know we're close to 7:30 or so. We have some slides of the weekend in September 2019, where Jean received the Legion of Honor medal. I'll share with you. I should mention a couple things at this point. One, Jean died in July of this year. One of my great sadness is that COVID and other concerns prevented me from being at the funeral, but even more that it got in the way of getting together with Jean over the last few years. I very much wanted to visit with him, his sons in Milwaukee, after the events of 2019. We had a great time. Dominique explained the wonderful weekend in France, honoring Jean. Coming back in October to talk about the windows in Minneapolis and Milwaukee was a real treat. And it felt like we were building momentum, and all of that kind of came to a stop with COVID and the restrictions we faced. This is one of the responses to COVID, this series of Zoom get-togethers. I very much wanted to do this despite the limitations we face, in part because these stories are so compelling and so important for what they mean, as Dominique just explained, to who we are and what we do under duress, when we're faced with crises, when we're faced with violence and war. At any rate, Gene was an inspiration for me on many levels. One level was just what he did, that he went from a farm in Clintonville, Wisconsin, or around Clintonville, Wisconsin, to France to be the secretary of a colonel in a war that was a whole lot bigger than everybody. It engulfed the whole world. He played an important role in it, and then later played an important role in setting the story straight about who Colonel Griffith was. There was actually some confusion. The French saw his dog tags, Wellborn Griffith, and thought that his name was Griffith Wellborn. So for a long time, that plaque read Griffith Wellborn. And there was a lot of uncertainty about who was the guy who was in the cathedral, who was the guy who died in Lev, on the back of a tank. All of that was cleared up through Gene's efforts and the connections that he made through Dominique with folks in France who were able to set the record straight and make these connections between the reality of who Colonel Griffith was and his family, and a lot of the connections that came from that. Dominique mentioned that she was in Texas. He's a Texan from Quanah, Texas, a little place 8 hours from Houston. I'm still not sure I could find it on a map, Dominique. It's a pretty small place, but at any rate, that's where he was from. He went to West Point and then went on into the Army from there, working with General Patton after the D-Day invasions. But anyhow, here's a little bit of the celebration that Dominique helped organize. The people of Lev, the mayor's office, made a weekend of it. First with the presentation of the medal in Chartres on Friday. Then on Saturday, they welcomed Gene in a big cavalcade along with his family. Here he is arriving in vintage automobiles. That was a big thing. They wanted to have a parade. There were war reenactors with all of this. Here are the two men you've heard from tonight, Dave on the right, and Paul and Ella there on the left, arriving in Jeeps, World War II vintage Jeeps in Lev. The whole town was decked out, honoring the Allies. The mayor of a town in England came because his town was the sister city to Lev. So all three the Allies were honored that weekend. Here's Dominique translating Gene's thank you to the people of Lev, to the mayor. Here's Gene and his son Mark, who was instrumental in getting all of that paperwork together, along with the mayor's daughter. It was really, I thought, inspiring for me. It was really moving for me to see how much children were participating in these ceremonies. One of the things that I saw when I was in France for that period of time, a lot of magazines written for kids about World War II and about specific aspects of it, like the D-Day invasion. So they're really keeping the memory alive, through the participation of their kids. Here's Gene saluting the fallen. There's a little parade. We all walked up to the site where Colonel Griffith was killed for a presentation of flowers. Bands played, a few speeches made, and then it was time to party. They threw a great party. On the bottom left, they cooked hot dogs for folks. The band played, including Roll Out the Barrels. This was all for a Milwaukeean, by all means. Up here on the left, Gene is talking with the Irving family, and down below are some reenactors in 1940s garb. I want to say at the end here a little bit about how we met with Gene. I did that research that I mentioned, looking at Wikipedia, trying to find out if something new had happened. There's a footnote to a blog post written by an editor at the National Review. I clicked on the footnote and found out who the guy was, called him in New York and asked him, how did this story about the colonel come out? This is like 60, 70 years after the war. Why, what took so long? Well, he said, the guy you want to talk to is a veteran in Milwaukee. His name's Eugene Schulz. And it just so happened that Merce Corps and I were planning that weekend to go over to Milwaukee to visit my birth mother. This is one of the new things for us. And I thought, well, before we do that, let's see if I can get in touch with this Eugene Schulz. So I reached out to him. One of the other things to say about him and Eleanor is that they're two of the most gracious people I've ever met in my life. They invited us to spend the afternoon with them. Eleanor made a lovely cake, and Gene shared with us the presentation that he gives to high school and grade school kids in Wisconsin about his experiences with Patton's Third Army. Again, the Chartres story is one piece of that. He tells the story about his time at the his visit to the Buchenwald satellite camp, and it was incredibly compelling. It's one thing that Cora tells me she remembers from that weekend. He's a gifted and wonderful witness to history, and it's that, and for much more, that I really respect him, and I'm so thankful that he connected us with Dominique and with Paul and Ella and with Dave and Mark and everybody else in the Schulz family. And that enabled me to do this, attend a mass where one of the most moving things I've ever heard happened. And it's gonna take me a little while to cue this. These are the bells of Chartres Cathedral, chiming a little bit after 6 p.m. on Friday the 13th, 2019. Well, there you get to hear the bells. Love the bells. There's a commemorative mass. Here is Craig Keel, who helped with the research. And at the recessional, or right before the recessional, this happened. Hang on. America the Beautiful. I just want to say that my voice tapered off there because I was crying, and I'm crying again just hearing this all over. It was a beautiful moment that Dominique and Mark Schulz organized. Mark suggested this song for the recessional. Anyhow, I also want to say a thanks to Paul and Ella Schulz. they were willing to join me on a personalized tour of the cathedral, which was something I always wanted to do. So,
You got to be a docent.
I did.
It was a treat to no end, Mike, and we couldn't be more grateful, and thank you.
It was for me too, Paul. Thank you. Thanks very much. It was
very nice.
Little dream come true. So at any rate, questions for any of us? I know it's well past time. I'm hoping you're still with us. And Paul, Ella, Dave, if you can stay, Dominique can stay a little. If folks have questions, by all means, we'll spend a little time with you if you want to chat them in or talk them in, either way.
Dominique, when's your next trip to Chartres with Americans?
Anytime. Actually, I'm going to go during this trip, and I will be going with Helen Hilken, who is also a board, a trustee, and maybe some of our American friends will want to join us. I'll go for at least a day and a half, and she may go just for a day. Yeah.
All right, sign up, folks.
Questions or comments, any reactions to what you heard and saw tonight? You can put in the chat box if you don't feel like speaking up for whatever reason. Javier.
It's always hard to try to tell something among all distinguished people. But every year I wrote Christmas tales. And the tale of this year is a spiritual gift. What does it mean? And I think I have received one today. Thank you. And congratulations. In this tale, I will try to define how you can get a spiritual gift for your loved ones. And every gift is for every person. So you have to decide is why to give one gift to one person is very hard. Thank you very well. Thank you, all of you. And you have my heart for this Christmas, especially you, Mike, and the family, Mitch. Bye.
Thank you, Javier.
Thank you, Javier in Mexico City.
Bob Wagner here. I was reminded of a quote by William Faulkner. Faulkner said, "The past isn't dead. It's not even in the past." And I want to thank all of you for bringing the history alive tonight, and being willing to share your emotions about it, the depth of feeling, along with the tremendous learning. This was such a beautiful way to honor some people, to celebrate Kluger, what you've been doing. This was just, it was just like Javier said, a gift, a real gift to us. Thank you so much. This was just beautiful. Thank you for the Schulz family and Dominique for joining us. This was a real gift. Thank you.
I think I speak for all of us. You're welcome, and it's our pleasure. It's really an honor to be able to talk about all of this with you.
And I have to say, I'm really happy to hear that they sang "Roll Out the Barrel." Mighty fine. Mighty fine. That was the right note.
Yeah,
And
I was looking for somebody to polka with, Wags, but you know,
yeah,
that it
yeah,
just,
no,
it didn't work.
I just have to share with the rest of you that one of my memories from one of my dear memories with Kluger when we were probably 21 is that we were faculty had a leftover barrel of beer, if you can imagine that, and they gave it to us down at Margarita Hall where we were living. And Kluger grabbed his accordion and came out and taught us roll out the barrel. The words, zing, boom, torero. We got the blues on the run. It was just a thing of beauty. And I asked Kluger if he would, it's still on his list. He told me yesterday if he would play it and send me the video because I want that memory. So anyhow, yeah, thank you for including that tonight. Oh boy, talk about a gift.
It was special. It was pretty special.
Yeah, it's great.
If folks need to leave, that's okay. Mike and I will stay on, but if anyone has anything else they want to say, thank you. What a gift it is to have your time and your attention and this connection. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
And I'll add to those thanks and wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving, which is coming up pretty soon. May you have good times with family, friends, whomever. But I hope it's a good one and a special one and one for which you find that spirit of gratitude. So anywho, Merce, what do you think?
I think it's in the can.
Any other questions or anything? Cora, is there anything we should be responding to in the chat? I forgot to ask.
I don't know if Cora's still.
I think she's gone now,
She had
Mike.
to leave. That's right. She had to leave at 7:30. She had a meeting. Okay. Anyhow.
Well, thanks, Mike, for including us. This is such a treat, and to see these displays of Chartres Cathedral iconography and things like that, and I see that Richard Legault, if I'm saying that correctly, who wrote the thing about Guardians of I'm going to misspeak the title, but with the angels and the astrolabes and things like that. That's an amazing tome that you wrote. And I was just at the Vatican today, the Vatican Observatory today. So it just was really kind of a neat thing. But anyway, thanks, Mike. Merci.
You're welcome, everyone. Have a
Yeah,
good
thank
holiday.
you.
Great to see you all.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving. Love you.
Thanks for all
Bye.
the love you sent our way.
Bye.
Yeah.
Mike, I'd
But-
like to jump in if I can. After that comment from Paul, I feel like I have to.
Guardians of Time.
Yeah, yeah, that was a bit of a failure when you get to the end of it, but that's not what I want to talk about. I have a comment to make that would tie together your last presentation to this one with the idea in the back of my head that, these Gothic monuments like Chartres Cathedral, part of their role in history is to record history for future generations and to communicate that and teach it. And in your last presentation, you talked about some of the windows that are up there in the clerestory level of the choir, where we have knights in battle armor who were defenders of the faith, who fought in the crusade against the Albigensians and in the Reconquista of the Iberian Peninsula from the Muslims, and also in the Holy Land. And the Légion d'honneur, as we know, is a knighthood. The medal confers onto the recipient the status of a knight. And I'm wondering if if there's an idea in the back of my head right now, I'm wondering if in one of the windows in the clerestory level of the choir, the window was destroyed and was replaced with a grisaille, which is just sort of, Dominique, how would I describe it? It's just sort of a gray glass window with nothing in it, no images. And I think for my money and for my vote, if there was a possibility of commemorating the story that you just told us about these two wonderful American soldiers who, as defenders of the faith in very real terms, one giving his life in defense of the cathedral and the other receiving the knighthood. I wonder if there would ever be a process or a possibility, Dominique, that would permit a modern window to replace one of those grisailles in that position in the clerestory of the choir. It's just, I have no idea how one would go about doing such a thing, but if there's any possibility, I think it would be a superb idea.
I think it's a wonderful idea. There are a few grisaille windows left for different reasons. There is one window which has been dedicated to Colonel Griffith. It's not any special representation other than at some point it was dedicated to the memory of Colonel Griffith. It's in the transept. Yes. After the war, I always get confused between all the Rockefellers, but I think it was David Rockefeller who had become very friendly with one of the curators of the cathedral, I forget the exact word for it. And he had offered to, at that point, all the choir windows were still grisaille. And he had offered to finance putting in some stained glass.
Wow.
But he wanted to decide what representations. And apparently the French objected to that. Now, the Americans, the American Institute of Architects has contributed a window, which is on the south aisle. I have to get my southwest aisle. And it's a representation, I believe, of the story of St. John the Baptist, if I'm not mistaken. And it's the only window which is signed. It has the initials of the American AIA. It's the only window that is signed, because traditionally artists in cathedral artists do not sign their names. But so I don't know what process I could ask. I mean, it doesn't hurt to ask. I mean, I'm going to meet with the French authorities during this trip, I hope. And I will ask them, if there would be any interest. There are some modern windows in the cathedral, but in the crypt. In some of, there is a Dominican priest who is also a stained glass artist, who has given some of his work to the cathedral, but it's in the crypt. Yeah. So you didn't get a good answer because I don't have a good answer, but you got some stories.
Good stories. Good stories all along.
I hope I planted a seed of an idea there that will grow.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a good one, Rick.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I love that.
Anyone else? Questions for Dominique or for Dave or Paul? Maybe just Dave. Dave, Paul's still here. I see you. Okay, Paul and Ella are still here. I missed your little tile.
I'm still here, but I have another meeting to go to, so I have to leave.
All right. Well, let's
Thank you
call
so
it a
much.
night. You're
Thank
welcome.
you so
Thank
much.
you all. Have a good evening.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
Blessings, Mike. Blessings,
Yeah,
your
I
chair.
wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving.
Au revoir, Dominique. Au
Au
revoir.
revoir.
Au revoir.
Merci.
Merci.
See you,
Rick,
Mike.
back to
Happy
you soon.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Thanks, Ron. Rick, I'll get back to you pretty soon about the essay. It's all on hold
Yes.
now.
Yes. Now that this is done, I can turn to your essay.
Okay, sounds good.